And there she is. Rania Mankarious is on the line with us once more. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We talked with Rania last November, and she was protecting us from Santa Claus and the Thanksgiving turkey. And Rania, we appreciate that.
It was my pleasure, and I'm glad to be back.
Well, it's good to have you back. This is a very serious topic, actually, this morning. You are, of course, a public safety analyst. You're in Houston, Texas, and you are very much involved in following crime statistics, and in this case, recidivism, as we talk about inmates who have been released under emergency COVID-19 orders and then commit new crimes, and what a dangerous proposition that is for us all. Is it that common, Rania?
You know, it is, and what's even more common is this felony bail reform that's sweeping the country, where we're no longer really asking anybody to be held on any type of monetary bail. And of course, we all said, well, if it's a low-level offense, if it's a first-time offender, of course, please do not hold them. But when you look at violent felony offenders, some of these people do have to be held, because if you let them out, they will go ahead and repeat. And we said that early on, and we're seeing it in record numbers across the country. Add to that the release of inmates due to COVID. And we said be careful and be really careful on who you release. There's certainly members of the population that should be released. If they're elderly at the end of a long sentence, why are we keeping them? They need to be released back into the community. That's just common sense, and that's just humanity. But that's not what's happening. And we've been, again, sounding the alarm on this issue. I'll say these calls stemmed from a study done in Hawaii. The Criminal Justice Research Institute followed 108 of the inmates that were released due to a state Supreme Court order, and found that almost 60% of them reoffended. And that's concerning. You know, they didn't say, oh, I was released, let me be thankful, let me just keep my head down low and not commit more crime. Almost 60% went right out there and reoffended. And I think about the victim and victims that had to suffer at the hand of that state Supreme Court order, and the municipalities across this country that are really catering to defendants as opposed to everyday victims.
It's interesting to me the number of people who decide that, in this case, for instance, 3% of those new crimes were violent crimes, and that was acceptable. The word acceptable was used. Really?
Yeah, they said it was a relatively, quote, low rate for serious charge. 17% of those were felonies, 3% were violent crimes. But what I also wonder is, we've been seeing across the country where we've recategorized criminal behavior. There are counties, there are cities like Dallas Police Department, it issued an internal document, an internal memo was released by accident to the community, and they haven't decided one way or the other if they're going to act on it. But they were saying, police departments are no longer going to respond to burglary of motor vehicles in the Dallas area or to child runaway cases. So we're seeing law enforcement having to reevaluate what type of cases they respond to, while the criminal justice system recategorizes criminal offenses. Well, stealing a motor vehicle is not violent. It doesn't hurt anybody. Well, it actually can change somebody's life. It can ruin somebody's life. That's one thing. Secondly, we know that the number one thing stolen from vehicles are guns. So what's happening with those? We know that they're releasing people that have just violated a parole order. Well, wait, what were they in there? What was the order for in the beginning? Mm-hmm. Was it a family violence case, and you're just releasing them back into the community where their poor families are going to be re-victimized? I mean, we are not taking a deep enough dive into this issue, and that's where we are really, really, really worried.
Rania, what's behind it? Why is this happening all of a sudden?
Criminal justice reform has been bubbling up for some time. If you really look at it, it's politics. It may be a backlash to the Trump era. There are some obvious, wonderful things that are being discussed through criminal justice reform. I mean, we have to ensure speedy trials. We have to make sure that people are given a fair trial, that the punishment fits the crime. We have to look at rehabilitation. But this notion that every single criminal is a victim of racism or every single criminal is a victim of society is not necessarily fair. And, we're doing them a disservice by just saying, every time you commit a crime, we're going to just go ahead and let you go back out into the community, because their crimes when they go back out into the community escalate. This whole defund the police movement. And I've talked to people that said, we never meant to defund the police. But you know what? You kind of did. You meant, let's take funds from local law enforcement as a means of punishment and invest them in other areas, which, by the way, we should be investing funds in social services. I'm running a social service nonprofit. I'm going to be the first one in line saying you should be pouring in resources to community organizations. But we flipped the solution here, and we're cutting off our nose despite our face, and it doesn't make sense.
We're talking with Rania Mankarious this morning, public safety analyst from Houston, Texas. Rania, here in Pennsylvania, there has been controversy because of maybe some lax protocols within our prisons and COVID-19 running rampant within a few of them across the state prison system. We have one of those state prisons here in our community. And obviously we want to protect them, those inmates, and the people who work there at the prison from COVID-19, from all of the various things that society as a whole is being afflicted from. So what is the balance? How do we achieve that without just releasing people back out into the community to do more crime?
Well, look, we have to talk about PPE, and that's one huge thing. There is a lack of PPE available to inmates across the country. Prisoners are having to share masks. We've seen reports where they've had to wash disposable masks. Obviously, that is horrific. So we need to invest in that. I look at Massachusetts. There are counties in Massachusetts where they've bumped inmates up and to the front of the line following first responders, giving them the option to get the vaccine. It actually was interesting. Only 9% of the inmates were willing to get the vaccine. Wow. 92% said no, or 91% said no. We need to look at that. Why? Maybe that's a very viable option. We should look at vaccination across the country. There's also this strange conversation that I've heard, not strange, but not many people are talking about it, overflow. We've found places, facilities that are not used, where we've looked at putting hospital patients, if the hospitals are overrun, that we found facilities where we can put additional beds. Well, maybe it's time to find facilities where we can pour in some of these inmates, some of these these people dealing with low-level offenses, so we can space out the community a little bit. But it seems like people are not really focused on actual solutions. They're running with the narrative that we've done from the beginning, that COVID means death. That's what it just means. It means death, when we know statistically it doesn't. And they're running with the narrative that, in general, people are not humane, and criminal justice as a whole is based on racism, which is not true. If you've committed a murder, I don't care what color you are, what gender, what orientation, what religion, it doesn't matter. A crime is a crime is a crime. And we've got to focus on, obviously, solutions, but obviously just punishment to ensure the safety of the community and especially those victims.
Is also the idea out there that COVID-19 was certainly a convenient way to facilitate a political movement to release inmates anyway?
Absolutely. A lot of people have been talking about that. This is a wonderful opportunity to push for, the unwinding of the country's what they call signature practice of mass incarceration. And it's an experiment. Let's go ahead and jump on this. Right now we know 170,000 inmates have been released under the notion of protecting them due to COVID-19. But we also know that we've just come out of a year with record number spikes in crime. I'm really proud of the New York Times, which is a left-leaning paper. They just released a study that said, we got to look at New York, for example. New York has faced tougher economic times, believe it or not, than what they're dealing with now. And the crime rate was not the same. They quoted even, Mayor de Blasio saying, look, we probably need to realize that decisions around criminal justice reform have played a direct role in this spike in crime. Really? Mm-hmm. You didn't need to go through the experiment and the loss of life and the further victimization of average citizens to come to the conclusion that that's, releasing inmates is not a good idea. It's been very surprising for me to watch, actually, to be very honest.
Yeah, and as somebody who watches it for a living, I'm sure that it's distressing as well to you as it is to most of us. I also got today this other note from an entirely different service that said, hey, you know what? You ought to talk to Rania about vaccine scams. So maybe you and I can get together and talk about that sometime in the very near future, too.
I would be happy to do that. I look forward to it.
And we'll make that arrangement. Thank you so much, Rania, for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Take care.
You have a wonderful day.
You too.
There is Rania Mankarious with us here this morning on the Voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160.